Okay, so I'm going to start. So thank you so much for coming to this final panel of the day. This is a talk by Josie Rae Turnbull, and the title is "The Fabled Fortunes of a Fish: Sunset of the Arowana." And I'm really excited to welcome Josie. For this project is a Rethinking Fables in Age of Environmental Crisis. And then like in this kind of today's kind of event, there's a lot of some discussion about the fact how fable is different from folklore. And I kind of think fable is a more exciting term because it's sort of kind of related to speculative realities. And then I think especially fables to conjure up the images. It's always kind of come with the image of the animals, real animals are imagined one. So it is wonderful to rethink fables through visual images. So thank you so much for Josie to agree to give presentation. And especially I'm very fascinated with the idea of the factual fables. So I'm really excited to hear about it. Okay, so this is a short bio. So Josie Rae Turnbull is a multi-disciplinary artist and art facilitator. She's currently based in London. She completed her MA in Fine Art and Science at the Central St. Martin's in 2022, following a number of years living in Ho Chi Minh City. Her work across textiles, sculpture, printmaking, and lens-based media is impelled by research into absurd, fabulist case studies of animal protagonists, revealing human failings. Throwaway consumer art is refashioned through bricolage and material glitches. The life cycles of various industries and the uncanny fallouts are reconstituted through a visual language led by artificial color relationships and material glitches. She's fascinated. She's fascinated by features common to aesthetic microscopic imagining and the concept of the hyperreal, and that of using the absolute fake to better see the real thing. Okay, on that note, please, Josie, floor is yours.
Thank you. So this factual fable is a narrative that revolves around the Asian arowana, which is a prehistoric fish that is believed to bring good fortune and prosperity. Despite its critically endangered status and protection under CITES laws, the arowana fuels a multi-million-dollar black market. Its cultural significance and exorbitant price have spawned a global underground network of breeders, poachers, smugglers, and wealthy collectors. I originally found out about the arowana as it's Indonesia's national animal of charm, which I discovered during a study semester in Yogyakarta in 2022. In December 2023, I received an Arts Council Develop Your Creative Practice grant to uptake this research and develop visual fables in response to what I find out. And this year I went on a 6-week research trip to Singapore and Malaysia to try and unravel the historical, cultural, and economic threads that have transformed the arowana into an object of obsession. Throughout my trip and the work that I'm developing at the moment, I explore the interconnected themes of humanity's relationship with conservation ethics, global trade dynamics, and the idea of ornamentation and the social construction of luxury. I met eccentric and passionate breeders and plastic surgeons in Singapore and Malaysia. I'll talk in a bit about the plastic surgery that is performed on arowana. So in terms of constructing a fable, I was interested in contextualizing the arowana within other colonial histories in Malaysia and Singapore. critiquing their transformation into lively commodities within the luxury ornamental fish industry, where their value is now constructed through manufactured scarcity and enhanced through cosmetic surgeries. Informed by material experimentation, literary and historical research, my work delves into the legacy of British colonialism and the extractive industries such as rubber, tin, and palm oil in the region. The narrative of the arowana as an endangered species subject to mass production and the fickleness of human taste echoes the environmental and social impacts of these other industries. By reimagining the traditional didactic role of fables, I tried to challenge conventional ways of perceiving and constructing animals. I visualized the imagined fate of an arowana fallen from grace, a former champion who's now been cast aside. Littered with the ephemera of success, there is a sense of tragedy woven into the works, asking us to consider the true costs of our desires. My studio practice prioritizes everyday consumer items like false nails, broken toys, doilies, and repurposed fast fashion garments and textiles, the aftermath of overproduction and consumption. These mediums mirror the rapid cycle of desirability familiar to the arowana, and much like the tragic arc of the fish's stardom, reminds us of the daunting lifespan of consumer goods that far exceed them moment in the spotlight. So more than just a status symbol, the arowana is viewed as a spiritual talisman, embodying luck and prosperity. This obsession operates on personal, cultural, and economic levels. It's coveted not for its inherent beauty or intelligence, but for its now scarcity in the wild and symbolic importance in certain cultures. Scarcity was its salvation. It was rare, beautiful, and believed to bring luck, which together make it the perfect object of desire. The arawana's appeal transcends its reality. Its symbolism, particularly in East Asian cultures, has fueled intense demand, making it a marker of social standing. The fish becomes a living emblem of conspicuous consumption. The tension between conservation efforts and commercial forces in the arowana market means that the laws meant to protect the species have actually created a lucrative black market. It only made it more valuable, transforming it into a commodity that could be bought, sold, and owned. So here you can see, this is at an arowana breeding farm that I visited. And as in the previous slide, it is the fathers that hold the eggs in their mouth and brood these eggs. But in captivity, the breeding ponds, every morning, the male arowana are checked to see if they are brooding any of these eggs in their mouth. And if so, those are removed and taken into the nursery for fingerlings to be raised.
It's very sweet because it makes them look like they're
in the nursery tanks to emulate what would actually be happening in the water if they were in their father's mouth. You can see they're rotated in this way to keep them oxygenated and to mimic the action of the water. And they look like kind of living pearls. So the first piece of work I'm going to talk about of my own is this, which is called HMS Repulse. It is made of wood, fake pearls, fake beads, printed velvet, and repurposed metallic lame trousers and pearl pigment. So Perak is the province that the arowana comes from in Malaysia, the golden arowana. And it was also the province that was the key of rubber and tin industries in rubber and tin industries in Malaysia during the British colonial period. They were extremely wealthy areas at the time, but are now similar to what you could call like the American Rust Belt, in that they in a post-industrial period, a lot of the industries have closed down or have folded of late. So the Arowana is from a man-made lake in Bukit Merah, but now can no longer be found in that lake. So briefly, the British colonial industries in Malaysia and Singapore, particularly tin, rubber, and gutta percha, bear striking synchronicities with the present-day Arowana industry, both in terms of their economic trajectories and their narrative framing as fables. Just as the British exploited these industries for profit, leaving behind environmental and social consequences, the Arowana industry today reflects similar dynamics of wealth status and ecological strain. We can analyze all of these industries as fables of decline, which mirror the broader narrative of sunset industries and the sunset on empire. In both cases, these industries become symbols of fleeting power and prosperity, fraught with exploitation and unsustainable practices. The fable-like quality of these industries reveals moral and existential truths about human endeavors, greed, and decline. In the Malayan trilogy by Anthony Burgess, which is set in the post-war period of British colonial rule in Malaysia in the lead up to independence, Anthony Burgess portrays the colonial economy as precarious and unsustainable, a system doomed to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. Rubber and tin, which once fueled the economic engine of the British Empire in Malaya, are described not just as commodities, but as symbols of the empire's ephemeral grip on the land. As Burgess writes, everything seemed permanent here: the thick jungle, the orderly plantations, the house, yet nothing really was. The empire itself, which looked so strong, was already crumbling. This sense of impending collapse permeates the narrative throughout the three novels, casting the industries themselves as characters in a fable of decline. Like the rubber and tin industries, the opium trade also carried moral implications for the British Empire. Somerset Maugham's stories set in Malaysia often illustrate the duplicity of colonial life, where British officials, ostensibly bringing civilization, profited from the very industries that eroded the lives of the local populations. In The Force of Circumstance, Somerset Maugham highlights the moral decay of colonial agents. He had lived for years on the periphery of civilization, supported by an industry that decayed as much as it grew, only to discover he too was rotting from within. Maugham's depiction of British colonial characters disillusioned by their involvement in the exploitative systems of trade reflects the internal corruptions fostered by industries like opium, which simultaneously built the empire's fortunes while destabilizing its moral foundations. So I will move on from talking about those. I also found it interesting that in the 50s, as Britain was relinquishing its colonies all over the empire and different places around the world were gaining independence, colonial offices around the world were burning huge swathes of documents, which is why there's actually, other than Anthony Burgess's fiction from the time, there's actually very little record of what British colonial rule in Malaysia was like. The bonfire of documents, or documents placed in weighted crates, were dumped by the Navy into the ocean, and this was known as Operation Legacy. It was an attempt to control how the British Empire would be seen by future generations and save the government from embarrassment during that transitional period. So the next, so gutta percha, briefly, is related to the idea of this ship, as it was a kind of natural plastic that was from a tree in Malaysia, and before being used by the British, it was mainly used for kind of household objects in Malaysia, kind of decorative objects like you see in these pictures. But then it actually enabled the telegraph cable to be invented. It insulated telegraph cables, enabling them to run under the sea, which had profound effects on colonial control and subsequent environmental and socio-economic consequences for the regions where gutta percha trees were harvested. Everything you can think that is now made of plastic was once made of gutta percha. Every species of toy, the furniture, the decorations, the soles of our boots and shoes, ear trumpets, pipes. The slang old gutta percha meant something common. The British Empire and the Dutch and French empires wouldn't have expanded the way they did without gutta percha. Western colonization in its 1800s at its height relied on it. The British Empire, the largest ever, used gutta percha to insulate underwater telegraph wires to all parts of their empire. A giant ship left Ireland with a huge spool of gutta percha to insulate electricity. This drove the British Red Line, a telegraph system which reached every part of the British Empire without crossing any non-empire territory. This gave them full control over information flow, instantly causing the empire to grow huge and gain a technological advantage. Okay, back to the fish. So when born, each fish is given a microchip, and upon sale, it must provide a certificate of authenticity, which is to prove that it is adhering with the CITES laws, and to ensure that it has been captive bred rather than caught in the wild, which is illegal. So I created this outfit, which is thinking about the idea of certificates of authenticity and also aesthetically influenced by reading about the British colonial industry in Malaysia and Singapore. So as Anthony Burgess portrays the colonial economy as a sunset industry at the mercy of global economic forces and technological advancements, much like the eventual collapse of the British rule. It is not the fear of tomorrow that unnerves us. It is the knowledge that the sun has already set on our empire, and we are living in the shadow of something we once controlled. The empire's dependence on rubber and tin to maintain its power reflects a deeper existential truth. One cannot base a lasting system on exploitation and the depletion of finite resources. The unsustainable extraction practices eventually led to the decline of both the industries and the empire itself. So just as Burgess describes the colonial administrators as out of touch with the realities of the land they control, Arowana collectors and traders could be said to be disconnected from the ecological consequences of their actions. They did not care if the rivers were emptied of fish as long as their own tanks were filled with the shimmering promise of wealth. Both narratives suggest that wealth built on extraction, whether of natural resources like rubber or tin, or luxury natural resources like the Arowana, will inevitably collapse. The Arowana, prized for its beauty and status, is a luxury item that thrives on overvaluation and scarcity. The very thing that makes the fish valuable, this illusion of rarity, also threatens to destroy it. The pajamas themselves are sublimation printed onto clothes that I found in a flea market in Yogyakarta. So reflecting ideas of bootlegging, global hierarchies, shininess, and detritus of consumerism. I'm interested in bootlegging when it comes to the authenticity of both something like an Arowana, the certificates, and within clothing. They bootleg designer clothing, question the whole apparatus by which theft is determined, a notion of criminality designed to sustain the powerful by condemning the sharing of ideas while protecting corporate theft of time, land, and resources through exploitative, polluting labor practices. Thinking about authenticity and the certificates of authenticity given to an Arowana makes us think about who has a right to steal and how notions of property and ownership can contribute to our perceptions of freedom. Similarly, thinking about the environmental consequences of extractivist industries, globalization replicates the dynamics of colonial exploitation, as now kind of the textile industry, the fashion industry is the second largest polluter in the world, only after the oil industry. Globally, 92 million tons of textile waste is created by the fast fashion industry each year. That means the equivalent of one truck full of clothes being burned every second. If the trend continues by 2030, we are expected to be discarding 134 million tons of textiles a year. So again, it's thinking about cycles of desirability, worth, constructing worth, and the disposability of our desires is. This is a work I made in 2023, and it's a printed banner, sublimation printed banner, and I used the idea of nets, a patterned net. So turning the 3D fish into this two-dimensional animal. Similarly to how animal hides could be used as elements of interior design or as ornamental. I deconstructed and reworked my own photos of Arowana and drew inspiration from the plastic surgery, the cosmetic surgery of Arowana, which I'll talk about in a bit. This is made clear through the kind of perspective kind of cutting marks and splayedness of the fish, as if these are anticipated sutures, the ideal future fish waiting to be stitched together. The incompleteness of the fish still being two-dimensional rather than three-dimensional references ideas of the fable as an incomplete analogical argument. If a given literary fable becomes an analogical argument when it is applied in living human thought or speech, then the status it has when written on a page is that of an incomplete analogical argument. It has not done what it can do until it has been completed by its readers, and they use this fable to guide their own conduct or to persuade others. So, to speak about the world of Arowana breeding and grooming is deeply tied to ideas of status, beauty, and perfection. These prized fish are often referred to as swimming jewels, and they represent not just wealth, but the precarity of beauty ideals. In the hands of breeders and plastic surgeons like Eugene, who I met in Singapore and will discuss further, these fish are surgically altered and modified to meet a highly specific standard of beauty. The pursuit of perfection, whether through the manipulation of the fish's fins or the use of DNA technology to create a perfect specimen, is a microcosm of the history of beauty, status, and the power dynamics embedded in these constructs. The beautification practices and regimens in the ornamental fish community are known as grooming rather than surgery, and the people who practice it as groomers. The term is intriguing to me for its range of applications, from the altruistic tenderness and care to more canny, self-serving social grooming and its more nefarious recent definition. The root responds to the verb to groom, which implies the idea of conditioning, caring for, or preparing. This gives way to social grooming, which denotes behaviors in animal species in order to establish social ties and eventually receive reciprocal favors. At birth, the precise coloration of an arowana is unpredictable. It's a gamble of nature. Fish owners and breeders employ various techniques to coax out vibrant colors, with water quality being critical to maintaining health and enhancing appearance. Vitamins, supplements, and specially tailored diet plans are widely available, much like the cornucopia of beauty products and dietary regimens for humans. In the shop attached to Sian Hu Breeding Farm, as you can see here, this is the breeding farm and shop, entire shelves are dedicated to medicines and treatments for different illnesses and perceived defects. A key aspect of arowana grooming is the tanning regime employed for the super red varieties in particular. This process involves exposing the fish to artificial light to intensify their red hue in lieu of exposure to natural sunlight that they would get in the wild. Advertisements for lamps come complete with before and after photos, mirroring human beauty marketing techniques. The practice of tanning arowanas also reveals a deeper, almost paradoxical relationship with authenticity and artifice. In Baudrillard's view of hyperreality, animals, once symbol of the untamed and mysterious, have been commodified and stripped of their symbolic power. The tanning lamp, meant to enhance the fish's color, turns the arowana into what we might call an authentic fake, a hyperreal perversion of reality. This pursuit of beauty becomes a simulated reality, reflecting Umberto Eco's notion that hyperreality strives to fabricate a version of reality that is consumed as more real than nature itself. The tanning of arowanas also evokes historical legacies of skin color's role in constructing human hierarchies of value and status. Red and gold are auspicious for wealth, while the 24-karat gold variant of the arowana illustrates this very literally. I was lucky enough in Singapore to meet the most expensive arowana in the world, who is an albino super red, valued at 700,000 British pounds. Historically, women and now champion fish have been scrutinized under a cosmetic gaze, where their bodies are evaluated for their potential improvement within an economy of personhood. From lead-based Venetian cerus used by wealthy Europeans to arsenic wafers consumed for a fashionable pallor, medicalized cosmetic practices have entered into racialized and globally situated discourses of beauty, reflecting colonial legacies and national identity politics. Skin, for example, has long been an important site of racialized cosmetic intervention. Entangled in the intersection of race and class, colorism has differentiated people by shade in places like the Caribbean and Latin America, or in terms of caste in India. Here, light skin is said to confer advantage in the racialized hierarchies that were the legacies of slavery and colonialism. A lighter is better culture underpins the profitable global market for skin lightening products, the most popular of the racialized cosmeceuticals. In the arowana industry, the tanning regime, while enhancing the fish's desirability to prospective buyers, can stress them out. At the Johor Bahru arowana competition I attended, a groomer pointed out that one of the contestants, a huge champion super red, was suffering from sunburn, displaying blistered cheeks. The fish's tank was swiftly covered with polystyrene to prevent further stress. Breeders and experts often spoke to me of the resilience and strong character needed for a fish to endure the tanning process, as the mounted lamps on the middle of the outward facing side of the glass are disorienting and stressful for the fish and can cause behaviors like tail biting, tank butting, and food refusal. During grooming and recovery periods, the water is a hazy absinthe green from the antiseptics used to prevent infection, which is key after surgeries. The practice of beautifying Arowana fish through surgery parallels the complex history of human plastic surgery, particularly in how it intersects with societal beauty standards and ideas about race, class, and identity. Cosmetic interventions in Arowana dictate what it means to be desirable and valuable. And the line between medical intervention for the animal's quality of life and what is for the increased aesthetic and financial value for their humans is often unclear. Fin and tail surgeries, which is what you can see here. So this Arowana has undergone tail surgery, where each segment has been sliced vertically in order for it to splay and grow back in a more fanned out style. This kind of surgery, which I witnessed in Singapore, was cheerily announced by Marcus, an Arowana plastic surgeon, to make them swim faster, like the propeller on a super yacht. But for a captive Arowana in a tank, this seemed to be an almost insensitive thing to say and of little comfort to the fish. The evolving trends in Arowana beauty, longer pectoral fins, jaw shaving for a better side profile, are indicative of how human and animal bodies are shaped and reshaped by societal and financial pressures to ideal to the aesthetic whims, and now for largely screen-based seduction and consumption. Dr. Arowana, Willie C., was the father of fish plastic surgery, training originally as a car mechanic. In the 1990s, he placed an advert seeking defective and damaged Arowanas, and then set about tinkering with these fixer-uppers, snipping their tails to look like chrysanthemums. Eventually, he pioneered the use of diamond cutting tools to remove fungal growths from fish eyeballs. Throughout the history of cosmetic surgery, there is a significant element of risk and experimentation. In the case of Arowanas, much of the practice is self-taught informally from resources like YouTube and is completely unregulated. You don't need certification to perform the procedures yourself should you choose to. This mirrors the rise of non-surgical treatments in humans, where the relative affordability and accessibility of injectables democratize and make body modification mundane. I personally witnessed the victim of a botched Arowana surgery, where the lower lip and barbels or whiskers had been sliced clean off. Eugene, who you can see in the bottom right, Dr. Arowana, told me that he is often harassed by misguided animal rights activists online. The fish are anesthetized throughout the procedures through sedating drops placed in their water, and I had to consider whether my squeamishness largely comes from anthropomorphizing, imagining a misshapen scale pulled out as my big toenail, or the tail widening as having webbed areas between my fingers sliced. Is the empathy or pity towards the fish as an unconsented patient warranted? Val Plumwood, a leading ecofeminist, critiques anthropomorphism for reinforcing the hierarchical dualisms that privilege human over non-human life. The human-centeredness of anthropomorphism reflects a wider system of instrumental rationality, which treats the non-human as simply a backdrop or resource for human flourishing. However, me wincing because the scale being pulled out makes me think of my big toenail could also foster my moral imagination, allowing me to perceive the suffering of other species in ways that cultivate better ethical concern. The agency If we think about agency in the Arowana, which is not necessarily a human quality, but distributed among human and non-human animals, it's difficult within the captive bred or champion Arowana, as there are few conduits through which they can enact any agency. They're often said to exhibit spoiled kid behaviors, which seems to result from stress, but it's deemed a weakness of character. Otherwise, their agency in the myths of self-sacrifice, which I'll talk about in a bit, are deemed as heroic. The time, investment, pride, and love bestowed on the Arowana by those in the industry is undeniable. Eugene operates from a belief deeply rooted in care, stating, "We do the surgery from love. If the fish is not beautiful, no one will love it. But when we make it beautiful, the owner will love it and look after it." Which is what he said to me when we met, and he was showing me his plastic surgery patients, such as the one who had the tail surgery there. Beauty becomes not just a personal or superficial concern, but one rooted in histories of power, exclusion, and desire. As Sadia Hartman observed, beauty is not a luxury, rather it's a way of creating possibility in the space of enclosure and a radical act of subsistence. The anthropomorphization in characterizing beloved pet Arowanas is also shaped by the investment, both financial and temporal, in the relationship. When clients worry that their Arowana isn't eating, Dr. Arowana Eugene asks them to consider what they might have done to insult their fish. "Don't panic," he advised. "Talk to the fish and say you made a mistake. The next day should be okay." In competitions, grooming, the surgery, doesn't have to be declared. This desire for undetectable surgery reflects broader societal discomfort with the artificial, despite the fact that this beauty is constructed and culturally contingent. The body itself becomes a site of social investment, where individuals engage in body projects to improve their appearance and, by extension, their social position. Cosmetic surgery in this sense is not just about individual self-expression, but is deeply entwined with broader cultural and economic structures that dictate who is seen as beautiful and therefore who is valued. In contrast, the cosmetic procedures performed on Arowana might seem removed from the human experience of beauty, but they too reflect cultural values and aspirations. Arowanas are symbols of wealth and status, and their appearance is carefully curated to reflect the owner's prestige. An Arawana's appearance directly constructs its value and the owner's reputation. Alex Chang, a breeder in Singapore, told me, when describing the ideal fish, the fish cannot be fat, it must look strong and have personality, and it must swim confidently. So these two sculptures are called Collection of Indulgences. They're mixed media sculptures of Arowana and draw from a wide range of influences in my research, including themes of ornament, excess, commodification, and spiritual history. The title references the concept of indulgences in Roman Catholicism, where historically the church sold remissions of punishment for sin, turning a spiritual practice into a lucrative, corrupt enterprise. The idea of indulgences are a form of exchange, an acquisition of salvation through material means, deeply informs these sculptures, serving as a metaphor for the commodification of beauty, value, and purity. In Collection of Indulgences, the history of commodification is transposed onto the world of aesthetic and ornamental excess, particularly in the breeding and grooming of the Arowana fish. The sculptures reflect the intricate system of value creation in the Arowana market, where the object's worth, whether is determined by its adherence to artificial standards. In the same way that indulgences could be bought and sold, reducing spiritual punishment in exchange for wealth, the Arowana's value is manipulated and enhanced through surgeries to meet the desires of breeders and collectors. Just as the church held a monopoly on spiritual salvation, breeders and cosmetic surgeons in the Arowana industry wield control over the treasury of beauty. They create, modify, and sell the idealized arowana to those who wish to partake in the fish's symbolic power. The printed velvet I made these of is rich and excessive, echoing the opulence of the indulgent system, where wealth was funneled into the church in exchange for promises of salvation. They also respond to a critique of ornament and the theory of hyperreality, serving as an exploration of the cultural, aesthetic, and symbolic dimensions of ornamentation, particularly as they relate to the commodification of living beings like the Arowana and their representation in contemporary culture. Ornament and Crime by Adolf Loos is a 1910 text in which Loos argues that ornament is an unnecessary addition to functional objects and a vestige of a less evolved primitive society. He declared the urge to ornament one's face and everything within reach is the start of a plastic art. In my sculptures, I consciously play with the with the idea of form and ornament. Velvet, which is associated with luxury and excess, becomes an essential part of the sculptures, blurring the lines between decoration and essential form. Baudrillard's concept of simulation and hyperreality also plays a significant role. In our postmodern world, reality and representation blur, creating a hyperreal where the distinction between what is real and what is simulated dissolves. The arowana, a fish prized for its natural beauty, but now often altered through cosmetic surgeries and extreme tanning practices, embodies the notion of simulation. The real arowana is no longer sufficient. Instead, breeders and owners demand a hyperreal version that conforms to exaggerated aesthetic ideals. The velvet texture of the sculptures adds to this idea of simulation. The material loaded with opulence, sensuality, and excess, when applied to the arowana, simulates something more than the real fish. It creates an object that exists in the space between reality and hyperreality, a fish that is both real in its form but artificial in its texture and embellishment. It becomes overstuffed and sumptuous. Finally, Baudrillard's ideas about the hyperreal animal provide a critical lens through which to understand engagement with the commodification of living creatures. In the hyperreal world, animals are increasingly represented as commodities, their images proliferating in media and consumer culture, even as their real-world presence diminishes or becomes extinct. The arowana, in its overbred, surgically enhanced form, becomes a hyperreal commodity, a creature more valued for its symbolic aesthetic qualities than for its existence as a living being. So briefly, fables, or relating to the arowana, are quite interesting. The most common belief being that a well-kept and cared for arowana brings its owner good luck and fortune while keeping evil at bay. Positive and negative energies constantly surround us. By taking good care of the arowana, it's seen to absorb and filter negative energy, allowing the positive to reach the owner. On forums and on the aquarium websites, there are lots of short, succinct fables that demonstrate this relationship, in that arowana sacrificing itself for the owner or punishing a neglectful one. Story 1. A businessman was in a car accident. Though his car was wrecked, he escaped with only minor cuts and bruises. Upon returning home, he discovered his Asian arowana had broken through the top glass cover of its tank and died. The Chinese believe that the Asian arowana will sacrifice its life to protect its owner. And a story in the reverse. Another well-known fable of the arowana tells of a man asked to care for his brother-in-law's 4-year-old arowana while he was away on an overseas business trip. For the first 2 weeks, all was well, but the man began to feel the financial strain of regularly purchasing small fish to feed the arowana. He thought he could save money by catching fish from the canal on his estate. Sometime later, the man was found dead in the canal after slipping on algae and falling into the water. In a traditional fabulist sense, the idea of the owner dying because they neglect the arowana when greed or self-interest takes precedence is a clear example of fable as a tool to correct individual greed and neglect community or collective generosity. Okay, you will have seen that I've used many images of Norma Desmond and Bette Davis within this. So through thinking of the arowana, I think the clearest comparison to a fable is actually in this film of Sunset Boulevard, which I'm hoping people will have heard of or seen. Hollywood films like Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane with Bette Davis explore the darker side of beauty and relevance, particularly in the lives of aging women in the entertainment industry. They serve as cautionary tales about vanity, obsession, fame's corrosive effects, using their protagonists' tragic downfalls to critique the cultural systems that elevate and then abandon them. The arowana industry now faces similar challenges: overproduction, environmental concerns, and a waning global market. The rise and fall of this industry parallels the decaying celebrity culture depicted in Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. The transformation of a defective or damaged arowana into a worthy and financially lucrative specimen mirrors Hollywood's star-making machine. In both cases, beauty becomes synonymous with value, care, and survival. The arowana industry functions as a modern fable illustrating the aspiration of being plucked from obscurity and made famous. The arowana industry experienced a crash in 2011. Breeders recall that arowana export prices peaked in 2011, but a rapid expansion of farms flooded the market with Asian arowanas, causing prices to plummet. Despite falling prices, arowanas in breeding ponds continue to reproduce, forcing breeders to sell more fish at ever lower prices. In Sunset Boulevard, Norma's obsessive pursuit of relevance and exceptionalism parallels the arowana industry's struggle. As the demand for her brand of silent era glamour wanes, she grows increasingly desperate to maintain her appearance and recapture the attention of an audience that no longer exists. Mr. Bay, who I met, who is an industry insider in Bukit Merah, where the arowana farms are largely situated, where the arowana is originally from, described arowana breeding as a very tough business today. He told me that he anticipates numerous farm closures within the next 3 years. Of the 9 farms I contacted, 3 had already shut down or sold their operations. Many arowana farms along the Bukit Merah Canal had folded, leaving behind ghost signs, faded outlines of their former logos. The Trillion Gold Arowana Farm, the 5-star breeding farm, Arrow VIP. With land leases expiring for many Singapore arowana farms this year, more closures are expected. The government, which owns the land where the farms are concentrated in Singapore, can choose not to renew leases if they believe the farms no longer serve the nation's best interest. While this isn't a concern for some, Sihanouk, where these signs are from, which is the most prosperous Arowana farm in Singapore, I asked Glenn Ong there about potential outcomes. If other fish farms in Singapore can't sell their stock to Malaysia or to members of the public, he told me that farms would hold closing down sales, then give away remaining fish for free before simply unplugging the power and filling the ponds with soil. A betrayal of the very creatures they once prized. The decline of the Arowana industry reveals that champion captive bred fish aren't equipped for release into the wild, much like Baby Jane and Norma Desmond aren't equipped with normal life. When I spoke to Mr. Bay, who is aiming to release rewild Arowanas into Bukit Merah Lake, this is only suitable for fish from breeding ponds, not aquariums, as they wouldn't be able to adapt. He said to me, "We can only take fish from our ponds to release. They're accustomed to a natural environment and can hunt for themselves. That's crucial. Fish from artificial tanks have a very low survival rate. It would be like releasing a princess into the pond. She'd wonder, where's my dinner? Where's my food? There's no human feeding me." Norma Desmond's famous line in Sunset Boulevard, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," encapsulates the disconnect between her self-perception and the reality of her obsolescence, dissonance at the start of her downfall. This paradox mirrors that of a prized Arowana, once a star of the breeding pond, now confined in solitary splendor, a living commodity, a picture in a watery frame. Norma's inability to let go of her past echoes the imagined fate of a former champion Arowana that failed to remain their one in a million. In both cases, the pursuit of an ideal past leads to an inevitable decline, as forces of change, be they technological, cultural, or environmental, render these symbols of beauty obsolete. So the last thing I'll talk about very quickly is this sculpture in progress, which I haven't yet finished, but is thinking about the kind of abandoned mansions in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and in Sunset Boulevard, where the mansions are a living tomb to their own fame and beauty. They're trapped within their kind of grandeur. The image on the left is my kind of main influence for that, which is a theme park in Indonesia that I found called the Lost Kingdom, with rabbits jumping down the stairs. So I'm currently making the envisioned abandoned mansion of a former champion Arowana, using, as you can see, materials of kind of conspicuous consumption and luxury. These false nails, which remind me of their scales, and I'll eventually kind of build onto it to remind me more of this this abandoned castle and mansion that I saw in Jogja. So the thing I want to finish with is a mantra from Sihanouk, which serves as a succinct fable. In this Singapore breeding farm, there are two signs on the wall, which I thought were particularly interesting. Definition of a good fish: no matter what kind of fish, as long as you like it, it is a good fish. And also, the fish in an aquarium tank encompass freedom as they are free from fishermen, free from bigger fish, free from starvation, free from weather change, and free from medical insurance.